Hey guys, you're joining us for another episode as we talk with experts about the future of the workplace post COVID-19 and our journey to get there. I'm delighted to be joined today by co-founder and chairman of Knotel, Edward Shenderovich. It's fantastic to have you here. I'm on the West Coast. I believe you're on the East Coast. Is that right, Edward?
I am. Hi, Dan. Thank you for hosting me.
No, it's great. Great to have you here. So Edward, tell us about your role. Tell us a little bit about the story of Knotel, and for those that don't know about Knotel, what's Knotel up to?
Yeah, so Knotel started about 4 years ago with the idea of providing flexible, dedicated spaces to companies that would be tailored to their specific needs. We work in a bunch of other co-working companies. In fact, when we started in New York, there were 143 other co-working businesses. So if we were to do co-working, we would have been number 144. We decided not to do it, and we've never really had this idea of having shared spaces or community as a part of the offering.
Right.
We believe that there's a broader market of commercial real estate which is not functioning well for the demand side for companies that need that space, and that every company needs a workspace. And I think every company will continue to need workspace, whether it was pre-COVID or post-COVID. So we've scaled from one location in November of 15 to about 270 locations now. We work with several hundred enterprises around the world. We're in 20 cities, including London and New York and San Francisco and LA and Dublin and many other cities in Europe and some in Asia. And we think that the opportunity for Knotel post-COVID is only greater than pre-COVID.
Got it. Yeah, well, why don't you talk us through that? I know that your company has had some responses. In particular, I read about your offering to health workers in New York right now and the health department. Can you just talk our audience through what you guys have done there?
Yeah, we organized this group together with several other New York-based service providers and developers. It's called Spaces for Cities. You can go to spacesforcities.com. And I think the idea is that the real estate community is not a stranger to joining the fight in times of crisis, that we are really uniquely positioned to help those on the front lines with something that they severely lack, which is space. And whether it's providing storage for medical supplies or safe-based operations for government agencies, different types of control towers, admin offices, things related to strategic design of spaces. We want to be a contributor to those fighting this crisis on the front lines. And the idea of Spaces for Cities was exactly that. I think that we are in a situation where, which we've never been before. This is an office virus. We were preparing for different types of crisis as we were modeling what can happen in the business. And we never thought that the crisis would be of the type that would limit us from accessing our core product.
Yeah.
Which is sort of ironic. And we have done a lot of work around workplace strategy. One of the core things that we actually do for businesses, all of our sales conversations start with the idea of workplace strategies, understanding not just what types of offices companies need or where they need those spaces, but also how do people work within these spaces? How do they interact? Which team interacts with which other team? What are the types of work they're doing in those spaces, whether it's focused work or some form of collaboration, or whether their workspace was more of a social environment. How many couches per person do you need in the space? So these are the questions that we were asking ourselves, and we continue to focus on workplace strategy, especially as we are thinking about this post-COVID world. What does that bring to the enterprise, and specifically to enterprise decisions around their workspace management.
A friend of mine who was pretty senior in the disaster recovery world, I was speaking to at the start of this hitting the US about a month ago. And he was just telling me that if an analyst had come to him 12 months ago, or a researcher asking for some budget inside of their department to model a global pandemic like this, they would have just been laughed out of the room. So I imagine, as you said, it wasn't something that came up in your modeling.
Yeah, and I spoke with some of our investors, and some investors in general. They said, well, never in their underwriting models was pandemic a factor.
Yeah. Fascinating. So as we start to think about going back to the workplace, and you spoke about the use of space, different assets and different areas, be that couches, meeting rooms, etc. What are your thoughts right now, kind of mid-April, as to what that kind of route back to opening up the workplace is going to look like? I've heard rumors of people having voice-activated elevators. I've been speaking with companies that are looking to do deep cleans daily. What do you think it's going to look like?
Yeah, I think there are lots of things that will change. But more things will remain the same. I think that the biggest driver of many of our decisions is inertia, and we will ultimately come back to offices. We will come back to some form of normality. I think what has happened is that many of the processes that we were thinking about in the past have been accelerated by this pandemic. One specifically is working from home, and more of virtual communication. So we will see some form of an integrated work from home and office environment as a result of this. That hadn't really been a priority in the past, but it will be one. I think we will see companies choosing spaces in different ways than they did before. Maybe taking into consideration where the employees live and what their commutes look like. Maybe choosing several smaller spaces instead of one large space. And within the space, within the space itself, which is your question, what does it look like? I think the trend that we will see is de-densification. We have been seeing, over the last 20, 30 years, we have seen offices densify. So in the US and in continental Europe, maybe in the UK as well, we went from something like 250 square feet per person to the smallest locations being some co-working companies that are saying that it's 50 square feet per person, which is which I think is not really viable as a solution, not just in the post-COVID world, but also from the productivity perspective. So we will see offices de-densify. This idea of having satellite offices around the urban sprawl is also the same in the same sort of plane of thinking. It's de-densification of the urban environment in general.
Okay, so just on that point, I'm just keen to zoom in on that point. So, in terms of the decentralization, are you talking perhaps less major HQs and campuses and more spaces dotted around the city? Is that kind of what you're hinting at there?
I think it's just more spaces rather than a single centralized space.
Right. Okay.
So more of a network of spaces rather than a single space where with high density.
Okay.
And enhancing communications with working from home or different types of virtual communications.
And do you see Knotel having a role in that as there's this mesh of spaces?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is our, we have been preparing for a crisis for the last 4 years since the company was founded. Every year in every investor conversation and in many of our landlord and other chats, everyone would say, well, what happens to Knotel in a crisis? What happens to real estate in a crisis? And we have been working with the idea that that crisis will come any month, which we're just not prepared for this one. But we're thinking about what would happen. And in our minds, that everything has just accelerated. We thought that we would get to this. We thought we would get to more flexibility rather than less flexibility, shorter term decision making on office. Maybe in 5 years, as something that's happening mainstream. I think we're getting it this year.
Right.
There will be fewer companies signing long-term leases this year than last year.
Yeah,
I think that would be a true statement. I don't think anyone would disagree with that. There will be companies will choose more flex. And I think in times of crisis, CEOs on the defense want to have more flexibility rather than less flexibility. This is also almost a given.
Yeah.
And we were thinking about how do we bring the different workplace strategy best practices into the office. And one of those best practices was around health and safety. We were not thinking of a pandemic, but we were certainly thinking of making offices safer, making the environment in the offices more conducive to productivity. So allowing people to feel safe, having better air quality, having more green in the office, having the office built be flexible so that people can so the office can change. So the idea that we had was that office is not complete. Office is a process.
Right.
And right now, more than ever, we're seeing the need for that. So when we were thinking about designing locations for our customers, we're using this idea of modular build or modular construction, which is almost like Lego blocks, which we're pulling together into something that can be that can quickly address companies' needs. And now we'll need to come back to the offices and redesign those for COVID. The health and well-being of employees will be top priority.
Yeah.
Alongside business continuity. So we are trying to mitigate the health of the nations and their economic health. Right now, I think we will ultimately the economies will reopen, and we will come back to the offices. Those offices will need to look a little different. So we actually have a lot of work right now talking to our customers and planning how we actually bring them back. Some of the things that companies are interested in doing is not opening all at the same time.
Yeah.
So having a gradual reopening. So maybe it's 20% of your employees that come to the space. Maybe people come to the space to their spaces on only on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and then there's another group that comes only on Wednesdays and Fridays.
A team, the B team, their days. Yeah.
So flexibility, I think, is now critical more than ever. And as I said, we have a lot of work right now dealing with customer